leads the yoga effort at Google here, and he's going to talk to us today about innovation at Google and building upon what David Drummond talked to us about at the Launch Summit last year. So, you're good. Welcome, Gopi.
Thank you, Tom. What I didn't tell Tom yesterday is that it is not because of intuition that I knew that. We use a service called Google. I just typed into Google saying, Tom Carter is coming. What should I do to entertain him? And Google told me that this morning he had a conversation with his son about the slides. You know everything. So I asked Tom, what should I talk about to this audience? And he said as part of this workshop that we're doing, he wanted the whole group to think about innovation, about how thinking out of the box and coming up with the next ideas. And he said, since Google is a company that drives a lot of innovation, I want you to share what are the core principles or the secret sauce behind Google's innovation. And I said, that should be a pretty short conversation. And the answer to that is only 3 words. And with the 3 words, I can leave the podium. And the answer to that is, I don't know. And it's not a tongue-in-cheek kind of response, because we often talked about it and said, we understand that Google is a very innovative company, it's got a very unique culture, but is it possible to really codify it and come up with a rule book saying, here are the rules of innovation, and if you were to follow these rules, you will become exceptionally innovative? We are not so sure about it. In fact, sometimes we even wonder, if Google were to start all over again and follow the exact set of rules, well, could we be as successful as innovative? We don't know. How much of it is by chance and the accident and being in the right place at the right time? But having said that, a group of us sat down and said there are still some core organizing principles in this company that seem to drive the innovation engine. And we wrote that down, thought about it, and distilled it down to these core 9 principles that I want to talk about. And the idea is that it is not unique to Google. It is a belief that these are transportable. And during the course of this presentation, I will ask you how many of them you think may actually work in your organization, or how many of them may work for this particular initiative where you can actually port some of the concepts that I'm going to talk about. So what are the 9 principles of innovation at Google? But before I talk about that, a quick history. This is where Google was founded 15 years ago. This was the first home of Google in the garage in Menlo Park, about 4 or 5 miles from here. And if you walked into the garage just 15 years ago, so if you think of it, if this company was a human, it would still be in high school and as a sophomore or junior. And in 15 years, it has been able to have all of these kind of impact and come up with amazing innovative products, starting with that little garage. And if you walked into that garage 15 years ago, you would meet with the entire company, Larry Page, Sergey Brin, founders, engineers, salespeople, and the board of directors at Google. That was their office. There was also the data center. There was the engineering lab. That's all there was, and a couple of computers and these 2 guys before they hired Craig Silverstein as employee number 1. And they lured him in. He was doing his PhD at Stanford, and they offered him a perk. And the perk that they offered was, you can have the garage door opener. And you can see the only employee in the world who has his own garage door opener to come into the office. But starting from that beginning, and back then the company had just 1 product, and that 1 product, this is all it did. You would type in some words in English, and it worked only in pretty much in 1 country it was used, in the US, in 1 language, English. And all it did was it would give you a bunch of search results of web pages that seemed to correspond most to the word. And if you look at, so the page looks ugly, right? Because it was designed by co-founder Sergey Brin. And by his own admission, he said, I didn't have HTML skills, so I just put this together. But at least he had ambition then, because he can say under the top search box, it says, index contains approximately 25 million pages, soon to be much bigger. So he knew it would eventually go on to be billions of pages. But starting with that 1 product, that little search box alone is now used 100 billion times every single month. That is 15 searches per every single human being in this world, in 120 different languages, in 200 countries and territories. Humanity just shows up and asks some of its strangest questions and expects us to come up with the results. But it's not just that 1 product. over the 15 years, there have been this explosion of all of these products, many of you which you may be familiar with, and some of them we struck out because we tried it and we dropped it out. And some of the bigger ones you see have all gone on to be used by at least 1 billion people. Search is used by more than 1 billion people. YouTube is, Maps is, Gmail is. So in a very short time frame, sometimes in as short as 3-4 years, some of these products have gone on to touch 1 billion people on a regular basis. So the question that we get asked is, what is it about this company that has allowed it to go from the garage with that little one white box to a proliferation of these products? And even the little white box looks quite like the original little white box. Things haven't changed. But when I speak to Arthur, the director of engineering for Search, he says his mom once told him, asked him about how many people work at Google and is trying to talk to her. So he asked his mom, how many people do you think work at Google? And she said maybe 300-400. And he said, why do you say so? He said, what is there? There's that little white box. In fact, Arthur, what is your job? You haven't changed that box much since it's But what has gone on is the complexity behind is all hidden away behind the box, because the little white box can do a lot more things. You can have like a conversation with it. So the proliferation of all of these products has led to that innovation. So what are the core principles of innovation? And let me talk about the 9. The first one is simply the fact that innovation comes from anywhere. And let me explain what we mean by that. We're often asked this question when groups like you come here. We want to talk to the innovation department. We want to talk to the chief innovation officer, because many other organizations have a chief innovation officer or an entire innovation department to drive innovation. But at Google, if you go search in the internal directory among the 43,000 employees, you will not get one person's name popping up. Nobody has innovation in the title. So then you ask, like, how is it possible if no one is responsible for innovation? Who is in charge of innovation? But it's Larry and Sergey's point that innovation should come from anywhere, because it is everyone's responsibility to innovate. In fact, one of the most innovative aspects, not one of the most, one I'd like to point out is the fact that we have solved the transportation problem to some extent and run the largest transportation network in the Bay Area by sending buses to pick up people and bring them to work so they all don't have to commute in individual car. Simple idea. And that came from an admin assistant who noticed that and commuting from San Francisco and saw 8 other people within walking distance. It was her idea. And that's an example of innovation of any kind driven by anybody. It can be right from the top, or it can be someone who's just entered the organization straight out of college. So let me give you an example of both extremes. This is an example of innovation from the top. This is an example of innovation driven from the top. So Sergey has been passionate for years about wearable computing. It's one of his personal projects, and he's taken the lead in driving it and extremely closely involved in developing Google+. Let me show you a quick demo of how it works by showing a video in case you don't own a pair of glasses in your Glass Envy.
Here. Here are the basics of how to use Glass. This is your touchpad. It runs from your temple to your ear. Tap the touchpad to wake up Glass. You should see the display above your line of sight. Adjust it to see everything. The home screen shows a clock. This is your timeline. It's a row of cards. Things to the left are happening now or coming up, like the weather, an upcoming flight, or an event in your calendar. You can tap on any card to see more. Swipe down anywhere to go back to the timeline. Cards to the right of the home screen are from the past. For example, messages, videos, or photos. Tap on a photo to share and choose one of your friends. Swipe down to go back to standby. And have fun exploring.
And when I wear it and walk around, I feel like it's almost like the 79th organ in my body, because it has a skin that responds to my touch. It has got eyes, it can see and recognize objects. It's got a voice because it talks to me, and when it talks, only I can hear it because it uses jawbone conductivity to talk right into my skull. And it's got ears because I speak to it. It can recognize voice commands. And clearly it has a mind and intelligence of its own, and a brain a lot smarter than I am, because it can tell me things that I would not know on my own. For example, okay, Glass, Google, what is the height of Mount Everest? Let me give it a second. It comes back and says 29,029 feet. Google, what is the capital of Burkina Faso? Searches, comes back and says Ouagadougou. So to that extent, it's like this amazing thing that we are experimenting with come out and driven right from the top. So let me ask you this question as you try to drive innovation for Project Play. How long do you think a prototype for a product like this should take to build? Just take a guess, and there's no right or wrong answer, because depending on what the prototype looks like. But what would you guess? Somebody, and don't be afraid. 5 years. 5 years, right? Yeah, that's a reasonable answer. Any other guesses? 3 years. 5, 3, 6 months. Yeah, 6 is like an extreme fast kind of case. And someone asked me this question, when the team asked me, I said 1 year. So the Google Glass, that is my guess. The Google Glass team built its first prototype of wearable computing in 90 minutes. And if it's in 90 minutes, how is that possible? Let me show you the prototype that they built. So a Google engineer brought his ski goggles, took a backpack from the Google store, stuck a computer, got wires from the tech software, those cameras and visors, etc. They were off-the-shelf components you can buy in an electronic price store. Taped them all up, and in 90 minutes they made it and took it to Sergey and said, here is the first demo version of wearable computing. It would weigh 3,500 grams. It looked ugly. Nobody would walk around with it. But in 90 minutes they're able to, here's what works, here's what does not work. And then they rapidly iterate. So rapid iteration and prototyping is a hallmark of the innovation cycles here. And if you want to see what the subsequent thing look like, if you walk to the Google Glass building, you'll see all of these things lying around the desk as the engineers iterate between it. You see that after the first model, someone said, why do I need a whole laptop? I can do it with a smartphone. So he tried stapling his smartphone to the glass. So they went from a version that is 3,500 grams all the way to about 450 grams in about 6 months. And then they took another 6, 8 months and came up with this version. This weighs 75 grams. It's lighter than a pair of Ray-Ban sunglasses. But it's a rapid iteration and prototyping that allows us to do this, and this is not necessarily the last one. And they'll continue to iterate it. One final question that I want to ask, just to kind of show its capabilities, it's kind of really extremely smart and funny at times also. Okay, Glass. Google. Who is the sexiest man alive? Well, it comes back and says, that is a difficult question to answer, but according to People magazine in 2014, it gives me the list, and finally it says, but no matter what, your name is not on the list. So that's an example of innovation coming from the top. But innovation can also come from anywhere in the organization, including right at the bottom, or what I mean is someone who has just entered the organization. Here's an example of someone who drove that. His name is Ronnie Zeiger. He's working on Google Health. He's a medical doctor. And shortly after he joined Google, on the Google Health team, he was troubled by something he saw. When he typed in suicide on Google search, the search algorithm, with its sophisticated search mechanisms, would bring the best result for suicide, which was how to commit suicide. And as a doctor, he was troubled by it because he said when people come and type in suicide onto the search engine, they're probably in some sort of trouble. They're looking for help. They are desperate. And we have a moral obligation to help them in some way. So he argued persuasively for innovation. And for the first time in the history of Google, thanks to the data he presented and the arguments he made, the search engine got artificially doctored so that when you type in suicide, rather than give you the best result for suicide, which is how to commit suicide, it actually directs you to the 1-800 number, the suicide prevention hotline. So now, if you go type suicide, this is what you see. The first search result is the need help, call this number. The day this got introduced, the National Suicide Prevention Hotline reported a 9% jump in call volume. Hundreds of more people are now calling it because they're typing and discovering this. And so over a year, several thousand people, and we'd like to believe that several thousand lives in America alone were saved as a result of the innovation that Dr. Ronnie Zeiger argued persuasively for. And in every other country, or most of the major countries, we've introduced this. So you type in suicide in Mexico or India, you're directed to the suicide prevention hotline in your local market. So innovation can come from anywhere. So how many of you believe that for Project Play, that is a principle you could apply, and people helping in any way or people participating could drive innovation for your organization because you give them the freedom to. You can? Sure. Yeah? Sure. Yeah, so that looks good, right? So moving on then. Principle number 2 is this notion that focus on the user and all else will follow. So there's an extreme obsession with taking care of the customer at Google or making sure that we create a fantastic user experience. When you present product ideas to Larry and Sergey, and they're a product council where you can present your innovative next generation ideas, you never ask the question, what is the business plan? How much money will this make? Never. The only question it asks is this solving a big problem for hundreds of millions of users? And if the answer is no, they'll say you're not thinking big enough, go back and rework the idea. It's never about the money. In fact, I'm sure that most of the products you use that comes from Google, you've never paid a single dollar. We don't even ask you. We are pretty bad at asking people for money, even though we build great products and services. It's all given away free. And here is a great example of how that thinking works. It's good to put this on paper. Every organization claims it. But it gets tested on a daily basis. It really makes us think, can we hold fast to this particular value? So here's an example of that particular text, or how we say yes to the principle. When you type in weather, for example, in Google, even before you get to weather, as soon as you type WE in this example, it shows up the weather for Palo Alto. Because engineers figured out using predictive search, we know that when people start typing in WE, most of the time they want to know about the weather, so might as well, even before they completed the keystrokes, just give the result to them and they might stop right there. And in 80–85% of the case, that is indeed true. So why did we do that? Why did that engineering team think of doing that? It said if we make this change, it's called instant search, it shaves off a few microseconds of every search. And why should a few microseconds matter? Do people even notice? But when you aggregate it across 100 billion searches that are taking place every month, that is several human person years that get saved for humanity as a whole. So they said it completely transforms the search experience. So they went ahead and tested this, and they were getting ready to launch. And nobody on the team asked the question, what does this innovation do to the goose that lays the golden eggs, which is search advertising? If you're giving the search results so fast, do people even have time to look at the ads? And if they don't look at the ads and not engaging with it, we make no money. But it is not that team's business. They are not there. They are only obsessively create a great user experience. So they got ready to do the launch, and just 2 weeks before the launch, the ads team, which monetizes searches, found out about it and asked the question, has somebody even done the analysis on how it'll impact the search experience, or the revenues coming out of searches? So they ran some tests and found that it was going to have a negative impact on revenues, but not much, a few $100 million lower. But they still went ahead and implemented it. It didn't matter. It could have been larger than that, but Google would have still gone ahead and done that because it created a much better user experience. But long term, it proved out to be a great bet because more and more searches have happened since then. So in aggregate, when you look at the volume, the revenue has taken care of itself, exactly as Sergey and Larry predicted right from the beginning. Focus on the user obsessively, and the rest of it will take care of itself. That's a hard principle for many organizations to swallow, especially if you think in the short term. But at Project Play, again, I would think that is probably a principle. Focusing on the user is an important one, given the nature of the work you're doing, and worry about the rest of the details that they will take care of themselves. The next principle I want to talk about is think 10x. And this is one of Larry's favorite principles that he's been articulating a lot ever since he took over as CEO. And he argues that if we all walk in to work every day and only improve whatever we are doing, our products, our processes, etc., by 10%, we will become a company of incrementalists. But when you're trying to bring in 10 times the innovation, it just forces you to come up with solutions that you couldn't have imagined. So 10x thinking, and this has been there from the early days of Google. And the way we drive 10x thinking, the sweet spot for us is when three things come together. The three things are, there's a really, really big problem that we're trying to solve, some sort of a radical solution that nobody has ever thought of to address this big problem, and the breakthrough technology that enables a radical solution. The intersection of these two is what creates 10x solutions, 10x innovation that Google has done. So I'll give you one older example and one recent example. So the older example is this. When Larry and Sergey started the company, they wrote a mission statement, which is simple. Organize all of the world's information and make it universally accessible and useful. This was the core mission of the company, much like your mission might be to get every kid in America between a certain age who's not into sports to get out and do something with their body outdoors with their friends, right? Something very simple that everyone can relate to. Now, notice that when they wrote the principle for the mission statement, they didn't write organize all of the world's digital information. They didn't write all of the world's web pages. They wrote organize all of the world's information. Now, when you're an idealistic 28-year-old PhD, you can write these things. But shortly after they realized what they had signed up for was almost impossible. Because very quickly, back in those days, in 1998, when they started the company, they realized most of the world's information does not live on web pages. Where do they live? Books, right? Who said books? Yeah, most of the world's information today still lives in books that are not even digital. In fact, before 1984, there are probably no digital copies. So when they came to the conclusion, they said the only way they can really live up to the mission statement is to digitize all of the books out there. Except who would do it? No library would do it, no government would do it, no publisher would do it. So they stood up and said, we will do it. Google will take on. And it's an important principle I want to make because they came up with this conclusion long before the company had a big revenue stream or was very profitable. The Google Books project started as early as 2004, very early days of Google. Part of the issue was there was no technology available to mass scan books in the library, thousands of pages a minute. So again, typical thinking, 10x thinking, and said, we will solve the problem. We will build a heavy-duty scanner that can go, we can put in libraries and scan thousands of books a minute. So Larry built the first scanner himself in his office, and it was a simple concept, a tripod like this. He mounted a camera on the tripod, pointing down at a book, and it would look at a page, and when he pulled the cord, it would take a snapshot picture, send it to a digitizer, it would digitize it quickly, and then you flip the page, and then you take the next picture. So he wanted to see if he could make it industrial strength, that he would pull it at a steady rhythm, but somebody had to flip the page. Right now we have mechanical page flippers, and for older books we have suction-based page flippers that automatically does it, like mechanical arms, etc. But back then, those things did not exist. So to test the concept, he needed the page to be flipped. So he brought in a human page flipper, which is Marissa Mayer. She was product manager back then, now CEO of Yahoo. So Marissa was his first page flipper. But the problem that Larry found with Marissa was that she was not flipping at a regular cadence at which the camera was going off. So he got a metronome, and as the metronome would go off, Marissa would flip the page. And that's how they built the first prototype, again, probably in 90 minutes, and got it working. Now, of course, we have industrial strength, and more than 16 million books or so have been scanned. And to test it, I actually went and took a look at Google Books to see if I could find some old Sanskrit text. And there is a team of Google Book scanners sitting at the University of Mysore Library in India, because the last known copies of some ancient Sanskrit text resides in the library, and they're going to scan and put that in. Now, the number of people who have actually taken the trouble to study Sanskrit is limited, and it's shrinking also. I'm one of those nuts who spent 5 years studying Sanskrit. But I can go look up at a text if I care about, and that is their commitment. If you set organize all of the world's information, then you have to think really, really, really big. So here the problem was, how do you digitize all of the world's information? The radical solution was to scan every single book out there. The breakthrough technology was high-speed scanners with mechanical arm flippers. And then putting that together, they came up with this 10x solution. Here is another example that I want to talk about. We've talked about Google Books. So you see a balloon going up in the sky. Any of you in the audience familiar with what I'm referring to here? Yeah. What is the project called?
It's I'm not sure what it's called, but it's Wi-Fi in remote regions.
Exactly. Okay, it is called Project Loon. Okay, because it's based on balloons, but more the reason they picked the name is even by Google standards, it's such a lunatic idea. So they came up with the idea it's Project Loon. So here is the big problem. We all use the internet. We are all delighted with it, but it's still used by a minority of the world's population. The internet is only available to about 1.8 billion people. 5 of the 7 billion people in the world do not have access to the internet. And there's an even particularly worse problem. In the southern hemisphere, 80% of the countries, the cost of internet is 1 month's salary. Okay. How many of you here on the internet? I'm sure every hand will go up, right? How many of you would keep it if you had to pay 1 month's salary? Not one person would. But that is 80% of the population situation in the southern hemisphere. So we know that our standard solution, and it's a widely scattered area with all of the islands, etc., in the South Pacific, the traditional solution of running wires to the house is not going to work. Wireless is not going to work. It's not scalable at that level. So the radical solution that a group of Google engineers have come up with is, why don't we use natural resources to somehow beam the internet from the sky so that it can cover a wide population? So that's what this idea Project Loon is trying to do. So that is a balloon. It is inflated using helium, and below that you see a payload. That payload has a wireless reflector, so it picks up from a ground station and beams wireless service over a 100-mile radius. And these balloons go up and fly in the air about 2 times the height of commercial airlines. So 30,000 feet or so is what airlines fly at, and these balloons operate at 60,000 feet. And at that height, actually, the winds are a lot less, so it's easier to manage the balloon. Now, so it uses, the balloons don't stay in one place. They're not tethered, because they float around, and the wind will take them across. So what do? They're not going to stay in one area. So what the engineers do is they let the balloons float for a certain amount of time, for about 100 miles or so, and then they either raise them a little, they study the wind patterns, and there's winds usually blowing the other way. So if you lower or raise the balloon, then the balloon starts traveling the other way. So you just have to catch the right wind, and they keep it over an area. That is easy to do because they've got a bank of computers here in Mountain View, and they can use computational power plus data that they're getting from weather monitoring services to keep the balloons over a certain area. But how do you lower and raise the balloon? Those black payloads you see at the bottom are solar panels. So during the day, they store electricity, or they build electricity from solar power. And day or night, they use that to then heat the balloon or release the helium through valves and lower up or down. Okay? So this is currently running as an experiment about a rural area in New Zealand. There are about 100 or so balloons. And we've tested ingenious concepts with this, including the fact that if you let the balloon keep going, it will keep rotating over South America and finally end up back again because it keeps circling. So a string of balloons, they tried it, and it does work. The concept is being proven over a small area. Now it's a question of can we scale it and surround the whole world. The final technology we may see may not be exactly this, but it is that kind of 10x thinking that that creates innovative, out-of-the-box solutions for big problems like this that we are dealing with. Another example that got announced recently is the Google contact lens. So how many of you have heard of this contact lens? So the radical problem, and interestingly, I have to say that in my building, in the first floor, behind the Google Store storage area and behind one of the cafe storage areas, is the locker room, and I was using the locker room, and next to that was decrepit-looking offices and a couple of people I would see working with white suits. I never knew what they were working on. I would ask them in the locker room, and they would say, yeah, we haven't announced this project, we're still putting together. And 6 months later, I saw them on stage at a company meeting when they announced the contact lens in this completely very shabby-looking office. It is pretty strange. I was so impressed with that. So you never know what people are working on, and when they say it's a secret project, just wait for a few months till it's announced. So here's the big problem that this team is trying to solve. About 18 million people or so in America suffer from diabetes, and if you suffer from diabetes, you have the problem that your blood sugar level goes up or down. In particular, I think the target population you are going at, because of lack of exercise, probably the problem is aggravated, right? The only way you can monitor it is to prick your finger and get blood 10 times a day. It's a very painful process for people suffering from diabetes and monitor the insulin level. In fact, one of the engineers working on this project, he had a situation where his mother was diabetes blacked out because of a surge in sugar level when she was driving a car and had an accident. So he has like a personal commitment that I want to come up with an easy solution. So the solution they come up with is in the contact lens, you see the circuitry and the little computer, the black one in the center. So they've built that into the contact lens, and you wear the contact lens if you have diabetes, and it monitors the sugar level in your teardrops, and then communicates with an app on your phone to say that you need to take corrective action. So it's non-invasive because there is liquids being secreted in the eye, and that's got sugar content. So they're measuring that, and it's still experimental. They've come up with a few of these pieces. They're still talking to FDA, etc. But this is an example of, again, you look at a really big problem. That is the radical solution that instead of pricking fingers and going to blood, why don't we use teardrops? And the innovative technology is that we can create these days tiny microelectronics that can sit in a contact lens and help solve the problem. Okay, so these are examples of 10x thinking. Does it make sense that even in Project Play that you could bring in 10x thinking and come up with some really radical idea? Yeah?
Yes.
Okay. The next principle of innovation in Google is something we call bet on technical insight. So this is something Eric Schmidt had come up with and is writing about in his book as well. So the argument Eric makes is that every organization understands a certain domain in a unique way. Nobody else sees the world in that way because of what they do, because of the data that they have, because of the customer conversations that they have. And that allows them to come up with some blinding insight that only that organization can do. So an example is, we pick like Southwest Airlines. Southwest Airlines, after flying airlines for a while, watching other airlines with their own expertise and experience, figured out that airlines make money when planes are up in the sky, not when they sit on the ground. So they architected the entire airline around this concept of let's keep the planes up in the sky as much as possible. So the kind of things that they did was they picked non-busy airports like Dallas Love Field when they first started, and did point-to-point so they can just run shuttles back and forth, back and forth. No assigned seating, you just board by zone. Now many airlines do that, and that way you can get people in and out very quickly. So a lot of concepts like that. But around the blinding insight that they had, that we will be profitable if we keep planes up in the sky. Similar way around, if I look at Project Play, all of you, because of your affiliation with sports, in some capacity, you probably have some insights about how to get the kids out there to play that nobody else can. I would not be able to come up with a solution. So bet on the unique technical insights that only your organization, only that group can come up with. So here's an example of that thinking that has led to this innovative product, the self-driving car. Because we always ask the question, why did Google come up with a self-driving car? Why is it not Detroit, or why is it not a German car company? But the reason being, we had some unique technical insights. It started with a fundamental human problem, which was a group of engineers read the economy. Every year, 1 million people die due to road accidents. That is more than the population of San Francisco and Marin County put together. When you see a number, we don't pay attention. But what if I were to tell you that every year we wiped out the entire city of San Francisco and Marin County, and next year again did the same thing? You would say, this is genocide. There is something we need to do about it. This is crazy. And every single one of those deaths are caused by human error. Every single one. Because people drive after they drink, or when they are sleepy, or when they are texting, or when they have an argument or a fight with a spouse, and they're distracted. All of those things lead to an accident. So the argument, the 10x thinking was, so if you take the human out of the situation, out of the picture, roads should be safer. Except it's a preposterous idea. How can your cars drive around without the human involvement? Again, the logical argument that the engineers placed before the group was, cars need to know two things in order to drive safely. First, where are they starting and where are they ending? And we have that information thanks to Google Maps, turn by turn, feet by feet, we know where the car has to go to. The second thing it needs to know is, on an immediate basis, it needs to understand what's going on around it on a 360-degree basis. Pedestrians, or bicyclists, or other cars, and the road signs, and construction signs, etc. And so we are capturing the information today because the cars with street view cameras were going out, and with the 4 cameras mounted for street view purposes, they said we are capturing the visual images of what is happening, except we're not doing anything with that information. We just record it and store it in Google Street View Maps. But on a real-time basis, as they're capturing, we could use artificial intelligence techniques to give guidance to the car. So using that concept and working with some artificial intelligence experts at Stanford, they built the thing on the top, which is a LiDAR. So the LiDAR looks around the car, in real time it monitors moving objects, what speeds they're traveling at road signs, and makes decisions, and the car is computed as the navigation. And the car has one advantage we humans will never have. We don't have eyes at the back, because the car can see 360 degrees. You can see right behind. There are no blind spots when you put on the LiDAR. So I'll give you a slight video demo of a self-driving car and then explain what's going on inside the car. This is demo was done with Steve Mahan. He is the president of the Santa Clara Blind Association, and he went for a drive in the self-driving car. So here's Steve taking it for a spin. And there's a Google engineer there for safety reasons, because it's still an experimental product.
Good. How are you? That's great.
All the driving.
Yeah. What do you want to do today, Steve? I'm all taco. All right. Well, let's get taco. Drive. 95% of my vision is gone. I'm well past the room line. You lose your timing in life, everything takes you much longer. There are some places that you cannot go, there are some things that you really cannot do. Where this would change my life, it's going to give me the independence and flexibility to go the places I both want to go and need to go when I need to do those things.
So you might wonder, like, how does the car do it? And I'll show you what's going on inside the car's computer in a minute. And when I show the next few minutes, seconds of video, on the bottom left, you'll see what the car's camera is seeing. And the rest of the screen, you'll see what the car's computer is seeing. It takes all of the images, converts them into 3D isometric views, and then color codes them based on the speed at which they're moving, or if some are dangerous, some cars are speeding or changing lanes, it flags them as red or green, etc. So watch this. So that's the camera view, and that is the actual computer view, and it's making decisions based on that. And stationary objects are color coded differently on the right. And by now, these cars have driven like 1 million miles. We have a fleet of them, and they go all over. They just go on their own to like Tahoe or Los Angeles and come back. No, but there's something. There's an image of around mountain with these crazy cars driving up by itself. But I've ridden in them. It's like pretty amazing that you just sit on freeways and they just navigate their way around. It's very surreal. Next, so my clock, Tom, just do a quick check. My clock is about 5-6 minutes more. Can I finish this up? Yeah. Take this? Okay. So the next innovation principle is a concept called ship and iterate. In Silicon Valley, there are two models that you may have seen. Apple, Steve Jobs would never launch a product unless it was perfect. No one even knew it was top secret, and a Mac will come. And when it unveiled a product, it was perfection. It was beautiful. It worked exactly as it is intended. It was simple. It was a joy. That was the philosophy by which Apple built product. At Google, it's the exact opposite. We just ship as soon as it's kind of ready, and then we expect people to come back and tell us what you want us to do. And then we make changes. So launch often and early is a core principle here, which is why Gmail was in beta for some 5 years. As soon as it's sort of working, we push it out. And then using user feedback or behavior, we constantly iterate. So an example of that is Chrome, which at the time when it was launching, it was ridiculous for anybody to even want to build a browser. Because Microsoft had 90% market share with Internet Explorer and some $60 billion in cash. And it would be nuts to go against it, right? In fact, Eric Schmidt, who had tried competing with Microsoft, had been bruised a few times, was completely against that idea. But Larry and Sergey felt very passionately, and they started this as a small project. Said there is room for a new browser if it is optimized and built for the web, if it is fast, if it is secure. Using those concepts in 2008, they launched the first version of Chrome. And since then, every 6 weeks, a new version of Chrome is constantly being launched. But basically, it's testing and iterating. At that time, when it was first launched, only a few tech geeks would use the product because it is not that easy to use. But since then, it has gone on to become the #1 browser in the world, using this philosophy of launch often and early, constantly iterate. And over time, based on the feedback that your customers give you, you can build a great product. Next concept is something called 20% time. And right from the very beginning, Googlers in the product area, engineers, have been given the freedom of spending 20% of the time on whatever that they want, on the favorite idea. That is 1 day a week. And out of that concept has come many great product ideas. Gmail, Google Alerts, Google News, they were all the result of 20% product ideas. Here's an example of an innovation that was driven by that I'm personally familiar with. So you all probably seen Google Street View maps, right? You can look down any street, you can get a 4-way imagery. One of the engineers working on it, Dan Ratner, once, a few years ago, ran away with my boss. Literally, he was dating Celia Steinem, my then director, and Dan and Celia went off on a vacation to Spain, and he had booked a hotel in a quaint older part of Madrid, and he tried to look at the street view imagery going up to the hotel, and it ended on the main road leading up to the hotel. And when he asked why, the reason was it was a small, narrow bylane that led to the hotel, and street view cars were not able to navigate their way down, and that's why the street view imagery ended. So he came back and said, I'm going to solve this problem using my 20% time. So his 20% idea was, he said, how do you take the camera, shrink it down so that we can put it on a bicycle? And he was an avid cyclist. So he worked during his 20% time, got together a group of engineers, and came up with the idea of street view on a trike. And now we have that as a product. We have bicycles going down places where cars don't drive. So if you go to now your street view imagery in like Jerusalem or Varanasi and older cities around the world, or bicycle paths, or places like Stonehenge where you can't drive the cars all the way to the monument, but you can take the street view trike. So on Google Maps, you can get imagery going all the way up to the monuments at Stonehenge. Let me show you how the trike works. So this is the trike that Dan Ratner designs, and right now it is on Stonehenge. If you want to see a video of it working, it's so will this idea is something that you could apply in your organizations, 20% time giving people the freedom to drive innovation so that they have the room and the space and don't get suffocated by bureaucracy? Yes? Okay. Next concept is something called default open, okay? And here's what drives that thinking. All of us, for whatever organizations we work for, always have this premise that we want to hire the best people in our industry, in our functional area, into our organization. And Google has similar kind of aspirations as well. And every organization says the top 1% of the population in computer science or in sports, we want to make sure works for our organization. And given that there are 7 billion people in the world, the top 1% is now 70 million, and assuming that only about 10% of them qualify or have the right kind of interest and skills, we're still talking about 7 million people, right? Really smart people who could do amazing innovation at Google. We are never going to be able to hire 7 million people. We've only got 40,000 people now. This is every organization challenge. So Google came up with this idea that why don't we tap into the intelligence that exists out there? Again, 2 models in Silicon Valley, the closed system, the Apple's ecosystem is closed. You get only one iPhone, which is made by Apple, and we do the exact opposite stand with something like Android, which is we will make the system open so that all of these brilliant people around the world can innovate on the platform. And that's why some 85 companies now have Android-based phones. We're now tapping into the collective intelligence that exists out there. And that has borne out really well. Now, it doesn't have to be just in terms of technology. We can do it with information, where we are tapping into the wisdom that exists out there to get to improve a product by getting more information. We do it with marketing ideas by, again, asking people out there to give us smart marketing ideas.